There... Oh, wait. Come on. Okay. There are episodes of Futurama, and then there are Futurama episodes. And they finally gave us one of the latter.
What do we say when someone gives you something?
About time!
All the Way Down centers around simulation theory, which is basically just Descartes' brain in a jar thought experiment rebranded for tech bros. It's the philosophical equivalent of what Ubers are to taxis. Look, I don't think this is an issue. In fact, I think it's something the show is aware of.
The philosopher René Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am."
But I bring it up because I don't want to spend this video talking about simulation theory. The episode wraps it up pretty succinctly and ultimately lands where I do. Doesn't really matter either way.
I feel, therefore I am.
I also don't want to try to litigate whether or not they're in a simulation. I think it's pretty obvious that's the takeaway. The show uses pretty clear visual language, zooming out from each simulation to the top layer before zooming out to commercial break, implying that the main show layer... This is why I don't want to talk about this. Labeling things, it feels like I should be making diagrams, it's just not worth it. And look, besides, Bender reboots in the main universe, basically the same way he reboots when he enters the simulation for the first time. That's so clear I don't even think it needs explaining, because then I'd have to try to label whatever universe is above the main universe, which is now a simulation, so it's like the main What I want to talk about is how this episode felt. There are certain episodes of Futurama that just feel more Futurama than others. They don't necessarily have the same themes or elements, they just have this je ne sais quoi to them. But I want a je quoi. Je ne sais if French actually works that way. What I mean is I just want to figure out what makes Futurama Futurama.
It's what made me.
Because if you ask me, that's what this episode was. It felt classic. It had elements of some of the best Futurama episodes, while simultaneously doing a bit of its own thing. The philosophical overtones in concert with a focus on Fry and Leela's relationship create a wonderful season finale that feels as clever and heartfelt as some of Futurama's best. While I think the two elements factor in heavily, I think there's a more abstract element at play that makes this episode feel specifically Futurama. Seeing as I've already discussed it briefly, let's start with the philosophical overtones. Don't get me wrong, you can find philosophy hiding in damn near any piece of media, but there's definitely a difference between an episode like Fry and the Slurm Factory and Godfellas. The latter, much like All the Way Down, tackles a philosophical topic head on. Maybe it's just me, but I certainly consider Godfellas to be a classic Futurama episode.
I was God once.
Yes, I saw. You were doing well until everyone died.
Both of these episodes are far from subtle about what they're handling. The crew not only sits around a table discussing simulation theory in this latest episode, they do it twice.
You sound like a stoned freshman.
But given the nature of the show, Futurama can take these concepts beyond the thought experiment. Both of these episodes are using their plot to present a philosophical thesis. Agree with it or not, Godfellas presents an interesting argument for the existence of God despite the lack of evidence.
When you do things right, people won't be sure you've done anything at all.
We not only meet a godlike being who is cautious about playing God, we get to see Bender play out that exact cautionary tale. The main action of All the Way Down plays out within the professor's simulation, and I'm realizing I'm not going to get through this video without labeling these things, so let's just do it real quick. We'll call the original crew Universe 1. I'll call the first layer of simulation Universe A, and we'll call these guys...
The Mongooses. That's a cool team name. The Fighting Mongooses.
And finally, we'll call the universe a layer above Universe 1 that the new Bender comes from, Universe Alpha. Anyway, most of the action of the episode plays out in Universe A. Universe 1 takes place almost entirely in or under Planet Express, with a brief outing to a robot strip club. Universe A is not only where we see the final action of the episode play out, but it also contains all of the relevant character action of the episode. When we're first introduced to the Fry and Leela in this final scene, they're composed of 3 pixels each. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if it's Universe 1, or A, or the Fighting Mongooses. Fry and Leela care about each other, and we care about them.
They're so cute! Now I care about them!
By having the narrative focus in a confirmed simulation, the episode is making a pretty clear point. It doesn't matter if it's a simulation or not.
Not one bit.
Kind of like labeling all the simulations in basically the same way because it ultimately doesn't matter which layer you're on. Though when talking about a narrative that's woven through them, it is nice to have some sort of identifier. Futurama can really catch fire when it's getting philosophical. But it's not always a guarantee. Free Will Hunting is, like Godfellas and All the Way Down, an episode that wears its philosophy on its sleeve. It's right there in the name. While I don't think this is a bad episode necessarily, it definitely doesn't have the classic Futurama feel that I'm talking about. Philosophy might be an ingredient in this recipe, but it's not some sort of magic ingredient that makes everything taste great. I think the same goes for Fry and Leela's relationship. At this point in the show, it's so firmly established and frequently referenced, but back in the Fox days, it wasn't such a sure thing. So when one of those episodes finally pulled that narrative to the A-plot, it was kind of a big deal. One of the most iconic of these is obviously the show's first, and best, if you ask me, series finale. For real, I can't even listen to this musical refrain without getting kind of choked up. Thankfully, I'm recording this separately before editing this clip in, because if this actually was happening in real time, you'd hear it in my voice. But The Devil's Hands Are Idle Playthings isn't just classic because it features Fry and Leela's relationship. There are plenty of other episodes, especially in the Comedy Central run, that feature their relationship in the A-plot. Fun on a Bun and Fry and Leela's Big Fling both take this approach. These aren't bad episodes by any stretch, but I wouldn't consider either one of them classic. And obviously, there's a key difference between Devil's Hands and these two Comedy Central episodes. The latter two episodes have plots that revolve around tension within the relationship. In the former, the tension is external. Fry and Leela are on the same page for the most part. Fry is finally able to express himself properly, and Leela is finally ready to hear it. We see a similar dynamic play out in another classic episode, Meanwhile, but this might be more related to the fact that they were both once the show's series finale. But clearly, we're onto something here. All the Way Down has echoes of Godfellas, Devil's Hands, and Meanwhile. Those are all giants within the series, so if we're looking for what makes a peak Futurama episode, then we're on the right track. But I think there's another element at play here that's elevating this latest episode. Let's consider the Farnsworth Parabox and the late Philip J. Fry. Both of these episodes have small samplings of some of the elements we've discussed so far. Fry and Leela's relationship is also prominently featured in both of these episodes. While this was fairly standard by the time late Philip J. Fry came around, finding out Fry and Leela were married in an alternate universe was a huge deal at the time of the Farnsworth Parabox.
There, but for the flip of a coin go we.
But there's something else going on a little bit deeper in these episodes. Something they share with All the Way Down. This is a bit more high concept than the other commonalities, but all three of these episodes have a sort of recursion to them. The late Philip J. Fry is the most obvious example of this with its looping universe. The Farnsworth Parabox is a little less direct, but along with general universe jumping, includes two professors pulling their own universe's box out of the other's universe. All the Way Down is playing in this same absurd space, giving us simulations within simulations and reactions between them.
Nailed it!
These concepts feel like they're almost uniquely suited for Futurama to handle. If you take these ideas too seriously, they start to unravel or get a little absurd. Honestly, that seems to be the formula that the show likes to take with these concepts. They start somewhere theoretically reasonable, like a forwards-only time machine, but before you know it, we're taking multiple laps past the heat death of the universe through the Big Bang just to get back to the present. The Farnsworth Parabox starts simple enough. It looks like you've got a single box that has a portal to an alternate universe. But once you start to introduce the other boxes and the fact that these aren't portals, they in fact contain the universes themselves, the concept quickly spirals out of control into the absurd.
So what you think you just explained to us is that—
Correct! This box contains our own universe!
And All the Way Down, we start with a simple simulation and discussion of simulation theory. Before you know it, the crew from Universe A has their own sub-simulation, and they're on their way to a magnetar to find out if they're in a simulation, and Bender is moving through the layers of the simulation like he's Neo in The Matrix. And this concept of absurd recursion isn't limited just to single episodes. It's baked into the lore of the show. The series starts with Fry falling into a cryotube and being frozen for 1,000 years. But before you know it, Fry has traveled back in time once to kill his grandfather and take his place, and another time to push himself into that cryotube. I think that's why this element feels so Futurama. This is part of what makes Fry Fry, and by extension, it's part of what makes the show so unique. When an episode can mirror that concept and weave in some philosophy with a dash of Fry and Leela romance, it's hard for it to go wrong. I don't think these elements are by any stretch mandatory. There are plenty of top-tier episodes that stray away from this formula. To be fair, saying that there's a perfect recipe for a Futurama episode might be a little bold, and it's probably a lot more subjective than I'm making it seem.
Yep.
I know for me, this episode felt like a proper Futurama episode because of this formula. I wouldn't put all the way down above any of the classics I talked about in this video, but it is easily my favorite this season and the first episode of the Hulu revival that feels like it's hitting on the level of the original run of the series.
Does that make sense?
Surprisingly, yes. Let's just forget about it.
It's just a shame it took until the end of the season for us to get there. Speaking of the end, that's kind of the wrap up of the video, but I wanted to tag this with a little bit more of an outro than I typically do. Thank you all so much for watching my videos. Being able to discuss my favorite TV show's revival with all of you is an experience that I didn't know was possible and I wouldn't trade for anything. So I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching this season of Futurama with me. This series is obviously over, or at least on hiatus until Futurama returns with its next 10 episodes, but I do plan on making more videos. I'll be taking a week off, but I'll be back in 2 weeks with a video about Season 11 as a whole. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.